Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer please update the House on how the government is supporting the transition from the mining investment boom to a more diversified economy? Is the Treasurer aware of any threats to this transition and what impact higher taxes would have on hard-working Australians who are working, saving and investing in our new economy?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Petrie for his question. He knows that the Australian economy is performing well in a very difficult global economy, Mr Speaker. And it's performing well because it's transitioning well from the investment phase of the mining boom through to a stronger economy, new economy with more jobs, Mr Speaker. 3% growth last year, higher than the US, higher than the UK, higher than Germany, higher than New Zealand, higher than Singapore, and double the growth rate of comparable economies like Canada, Mr Speaker. More than 440,000 jobs have been created since the last election, Mr Speaker, and importantly in the last 18 months, more than 50,000 jobs for young people, which sees the youth unemployment rate today below what it was at the last election, Mr Speaker. Now, the budget that will be brought down on the 3rd of May, Mr Speaker, continues to focus on jobs and growth, Mr Speaker, and ensuring that we have a targeted and sustainable tax system to support the commitments that the government must undertake, Mr Speaker, for the long term, and to ensure that we stay on a consolidated path to budget balance, Mr Speaker, by getting expenditure under control continually, Mr Speaker, and growing the economy to grow revenues. Now, there are alternatives to that plan, Mr Speaker, and they're put forward by those opposite, and it's simply this: to increase the tax burden on the Australian economy by $100 billion, Mr Speaker, over the next 10 years. Now, that's their figure, Mr Speaker. It's their figure, and they boast of it. They boast of the claim that they will increase the tax burden on the Australian economy by over $100 billion over the next 10 years. Now, Mr Speaker, they're not doing it to reduce the deficit. They're not doing it to reduce the deficit. They're doing it, Mr Speaker, to try and chase the money they're throwing around with even higher and higher spending, Mr Speaker. So from those opposite, what you get is you get higher taxes, higher spending, a bigger deficit and a bigger debt. That's the proposal of those opposite, Mr Speaker, in comparison to the path that is being pursued by those on this side of the House, Mr Speaker. And Mr Speaker, I quote the former Queensland Premier, Peter Beattie, who said, "I don't think Australia is in a great position to be increasing the tax burden to any significant degree, Mr Speaker." Well, I would call an increase in the tax burden of over $100 billion in the next 10 years by the proposals of those opposite, with no proposal to reduce tax, no proposal to reduce spending, no proposal to reduce the deficit, just to see higher debt and higher deficits, Mr Speaker, as a result of their policies. What you have in the opposition leader, Mr Speaker, is nothing new. We've seen it all before. We saw it in those 6 years where they took a $20 billion surplus and turned it into a $50 billion deficit, Mr Speaker. We have seen it all before, Mr Speaker. There's nothing new about this opposition leader.